A human faced an apex predator. What he did left her speechless. Nyx crouched behind the crystalline formations that jutted from Valeria Prime's purple soil, her bioluminescent markings pulsing nervously in the twilight. Her compound eyes tracked every movement as the off-worlder prepared for what could only be his death. The human called himself Dante Cross, and he'd been stranded here for 5 rotations after his transport was torn apart by the plasma storms that raged through this sector. She'd been watching him from a distance, fascinated by his survival instincts. Most species lasted mere hours on Valeria Prime before the planet's predators claimed them. Yet somehow, this single human had not only survived, but thrived, crafting tools from his ship's wreckage and finding shelter in the bone-white caves. But now he faced a ravager. The creature emerged from the crimson mists like a nightmare-given form. 20 feet of corded muscle, razor-sharp bone spurs, an intelligence that rivaled most sentient species. Its hide could deflect plasma cannons. Its claws could slice through battle armor like parchment. Even Valerian shock troops with their powered exoskeletons and neural enhancers avoided ravagers at all costs. They were apex predators in the truest sense, having evolved over millennia to be perfect killing machines. Dante stood his ground, holding what appeared to be a crude spear fashioned from hull plating and power conduits. The weapon sparked with residual energy from his ship's reactor core, but it looked pitiful against the approaching Titan. "Run, you fool," Nyx whispered in her native tongue, her thorax vibrating with emotion she didn't fully understand. In the days she'd observed him, something about the human had stirred feelings she'd never experienced. Perhaps it was his determination, or the gentle way he tended to an injured scavenger bird, but she found herself invested in his survival. The Ravager charged with earth-shaking force, its bone-spur-tipped arms sweeping toward Dante like falling meteors. What happened next defied everything Nyx thought she knew about human limitations. Dante didn't retreat. Instead, he rolled beneath the massive claws with impossible grace, his movements flowing like liquid mercury. As he came up beside the creature's flank, he drove his improvised spear deep into the gap between the Ravager's armor plates, the sound of puncturing flesh mixed with the creature's roar of pain and surprise. But Dante wasn't finished. With strength that should have been impossible for his frame, he grabbed the Ravager's massive forearm mid-swing. Nyx watched in stunned disbelief as he held the limb steady, muscles straining but holding firm against a creature that could crush hover tanks. Then, with a sound like snapping trees, he twisted. The Ravager's arm separated from its socket in an explosion of dark ichor. The apex predator's howl of agony echoed across the wasteland as it stumbled backward, green blood streaming from the wound. Dante didn't pause to admire his work. He spun, driving his energy-charged spear through the creature's exposed chest with surgical precision. The weapon punched through hide that had turned aside military-grade weapons, emerging from the Ravager's back in a shower of sparks and gore. The mighty predator collapsed, its death throes carving deep furrows in the crystalline ground. Nyx remained frozen behind her hiding spot, her mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. A single human, injured, stranded, equipped with nothing but salvaged parts, had killed a Ravager in direct combat. It was impossible, it was beautiful, it was terrifying. And despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, she found herself stepping into the clearing where Dante sat beside a small fire, calmly preparing strips of Ravager meat for cooking. "What are you?" Nyx finally managed to ask, stepping fully into the firelight. Her bioluminescent markings had shifted to a deep amber, a color that in Valerian culture signified both fear and fascination. Dante looked up from where he sat tending the fire, a piece of Ravager meat sizzling on a makeshift spit crafted from salvaged conduits. His dark eyes held depths she couldn't fathom, and when he smiled, it was tinged with something that might have been sadness. "Just a guy trying to get home," he said, echoing words that felt rehearsed as if he'd given this answer many times before. Nyx's compound eyes narrowed, her head tilting in the gesture her people used to express disbelief. "You destroyed a Ravager as if it were a hatchling's training dummy. Our greatest warriors fall to such beasts, and you You tore it apart with your bare hands. Dante chuckled, but there was no humor in it. He poked the fire with a metal rod, sending sparks dancing into the violet sky of Valeria Prime. Back on Earth, we'd call that thing a problem predator. Big, mean, territorial, but not invincible. He glanced at her, noting how her markings pulsed faster when he spoke. Nothing's truly invincible if you know where to hit it. Impossible, Nyx breathed, moving closer despite every survival instinct screaming at her to maintain distance. Ravagers are the apex predators of 17 worlds. They've been studied for centuries. Their hide can stop plasma rounds. Yeah, I noticed. Dante's voice carried a weight that made her thorax vibrate with empathy. You ever heard of a genetic engineer named Dr. Victor Kane? The name sent a chill through Nyx's exoskeleton. She'd heard whispers of him in the xenological files, forbidden research that the Galactic Council had tried to bury. He was a war criminal, banned from practicing after the Terran conflicts. Depends who you ask, Dante said, his tone carefully neutral. He leaned forward, and in the firelight, Nyx could see faint scars along his arms that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. I was born in one of his black sites, Project Titan they called it, designed for planetary pacification operations. Nyx felt her world tilt. The human before her, this being she'd found herself inexplicably drawn to, was speaking of himself as if he were a manufactured object. You're enhanced? Engineered, Dante corrected softly. Built from the ground up to be faster, stronger, more resilient than baseline humans. Enhanced reflexes, redundant organ systems, accelerated healing. We weren't supposed to survive past our operational lifespan. Most didn't. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm one of the last. The fire crackled between them, and Nyx found herself studying his face with new eyes. The strong jawline, the way his muscles moved beneath his torn uniform, the calm confidence he radiated even in this hostile environment. It all made sense now. And yet, you saved that injured scavenger bird yesterday, she said quietly. I watched you tend to its wing, make sure it could fly before releasing it. A weapon wouldn't do that. Dante's expression softened, and for a moment, she saw past the engineered soldier to something achingly human beneath. Kane designed us to be weapons, yes, but he couldn't engineer out everything that makes us human, couldn't remove compassion, or the need for connection. His eyes met hers, and she felt her bioluminescence shift to a warm gold. Sometimes I think that's what he feared most, that we'd choose to be more than what he made us. Nyx moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. In her culture, touch was reserved for family and bonded pairs, yet she found herself reaching out to trace one of the shimmering scars on his forearm. His skin was warm, almost fever-hot compared to her own cooler biology. Does it hurt? She asked. Being what you are? Dante's hand covered hers, and she marveled at how gentle his touch was despite the strength she'd witnessed. Sometimes, but not right now. His thumb traced across her chitinous knuckles, and she realized her markings were now pulsing in perfect synchronization with his heartbeat. What about you? Does it frighten you knowing what I am? Nyx considered the question seriously. By all logic, she should report this encounter to the High Council. An engineered human on Valerian Prime was a threat that required immediate attention, but looking into Dante's eyes, seeing the vulnerability he was allowing her to witness, it should, she admitted. But all I can think about is how you chose to save that bird, how you're sitting here sharing your fire and your food with me instead of seeing me as another threat to eliminate. Her bioluminescence brightened, casting rainbow patterns across his face. I think Dr. Kane failed in his greatest objective. He tried to create a weapon, but instead he created a man. For the first time since she'd been watching him, Dante's careful composure cracked. The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his features from merely handsome to absolutely breathtaking. Careful, Nyx, he said, and her heart skipped at hearing him speak her name. You keep talking like that, and I might start believing you. In the days that followed, Nyx shadowed Dante as he moved through the deadly landscapes of Valeria Prime. Where others would tread carefully around danger, he walked through it, as if it owed him tribute. When razor-wing flyers dove from the crystalline cliffs, he caught them mid-flight and snapped their necks with clinical precision. When acid-spitting tunnel crawlers erupted from the ground, he dispatched them with improvised explosives that turned their own corrosive blood against them. But it was during a quiet moment, as they sheltered in a cave during one of the planet's violent ion storms, that Nyx truly began to understand the man beneath the engineered exterior. "You never hesitate," she observed, watching him clean his weapons with methodical care. "Even when facing something you've never encountered before, you act with perfect certainty." Dante paused in his work, considering her words. "Can't afford to hesitate when you're designed to end threats before they become threats. You analyze, adapt, and strike. Hesitation gets you killed, and worse, gets others killed too." The way he said others made her thorax flutter with emotion. "Is that why you tend to that injured scavenger bird? Why you share your rations with me even though your supplies are limited?" His hands stilled on the weapon. "Cain tried to program out our protective instincts, but he couldn't eliminate them entirely. Said they were tactical weaknesses." Dante's voice grew softer. "Maybe they are, but they're also what makes us more than just killing machines." Nyx moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his tone. Her bioluminescent markings had begun pulsing in rhythm with his breathing, a bonding response she couldn't quite control. "Your people, do they know what you truly are? Most don't. The few who do." He shrugged, but she could see the pain it caused him. "Let's just say enhanced humans aren't exactly welcome in polite society. Too much like looking in a mirror and seeing what we're capable of becoming." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant roar that made the cave walls vibrate. But this wasn't the solitary hunting call they'd grown accustomed to. This was something else, something coordinated. Dante was on his feet instantly, every muscle tensed for action. "That's not normal Ravager behavior." Nyx's compound eyes widened with growing horror. "The kill," she whispered. "When you destroyed that Ravager, it must have triggered something. They're pack bonding." "Pack bonding?" Dante checked his weapons with swift efficiency. "How many are we talking about?" "Ravagers haven't exhibited coordinated hunting behavior in over 3 centuries, Nyx said, her voice tight with fear. "But the old texts speak of swarm responses when an alpha is killed. Dozens, maybe hundreds." Through their growing connection, Dante could sense her terror, and it stirred something protective in his engineered psychology. Without conscious thought, he moved to stand between her and the cave entrance. "We need to warn your people." Nyx's markings shifted to a deep purple, the color of despair. "The High Council won't listen. They've already declared you an abomination, a threat to our natural order. High Speaker Vexhai has issued orders for your capture or termination." "Vexhai?" Dante's expression hardened. "Let me guess. Proud, traditional, believes in the superiority of pure bloodlines? How did you?" "Because I've met his type before. On every world where enhanced humans have tried to find acceptance." Dante's voice carried centuries of accumulated weariness. "They see us as a contamination of the natural order, something to be studied, controlled, or eliminated." Another roar echoed across the wasteland, closer this time, answered by 2 more from different directions. The Ravagers were communicating, coordinating their hunt. Nyx reached out, her chitinous fingers intertwining with his human ones. The gesture would have been scandalous by Valerian standards. Intimate contact between species was forbidden, but she no longer cared about such restrictions. "What do we do?" Dante squeezed her hand gently, marveling at how right it felt despite their biological differences. "We do what enhanced soldiers do best. We adapt, we survive, and we protect what matters." He looked into her compound eyes, seeing his own reflection multiplied hundreds of times. "But I need you to understand something, Nyx. If we're going to face this together, there can't be any secrets between us. What you've seen so far, the strength, the speed, the combat skills, that's just the beginning. When pushed, when protecting someone I care about, I become something that might frighten you. Nyx's bioluminescence pulsed brighter, casting rainbow patterns across the cave walls. You care about me? Despite everything, the approaching danger, the impossible odds, the fact that her own people wanted him dead, Dante smiled. More than I should. More than is probably wise for either of us. She leaned closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her exoskeleton. Then show me, she whispered. Show me what you really are. All of it. The sound of approaching ravagers grew louder, their coordinated hunting calls creating a symphony of impending death. But in that moment, surrounded by danger and faced with impossible odds, Dante felt something he hadn't experienced since his escape from Kane's laboratories. He felt hope. Stay close to me, he said, checking his weapons one final time. And, Nyx, whatever happens next, whatever you see me become, remember that I choose to fight for you. That choice is what makes me human. Outside their shelter, the first of the Ravager pack crested the ridge, its eyes glowing like crimson stars in the alien twilight. The hunt had begun. The reports came in fragments over the next 2 rotations, entire settlements vanishing overnight, survey teams found as nothing more than scattered chitin and metal. The Ravager packs were moving with unprecedented coordination, and at their heart, something ancient was stirring. Dante stood at the edge of the Crimson Gorge, his enhanced senses picking up vibrations that made his bones ache. Beside him, Nyx monitored the bioscanner they'd salvaged from her crashed speeder, her bioluminescent markings flickering with increasing alarm. The seismic readings are impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Something massive is moving down there, something that shouldn't exist. The answer came as a roar that shattered crystal formations for miles around, a sound so primal and rage-filled that it seemed to tear reality itself. From the depths of the gorge, something began to rise. The mother beast emerged like a living mountain, 60 feet of prehistoric fury that predated Valerian civilization by millennia. Her hide was scarred by countless battles, thick as starship armor, and mottled with the remains of her victims. Bone spurs jutted from her massive frame, like cathedral spires, and her eyes, intelligent, ancient, and utterly merciless, fixed on the tiny figures above. By the void, Nyx breathed, her compound eyes reflecting the creature's massive form. The progenitor. She's real. Dante's expression was grim, but determined. Around the mother beast's massive form, dozens of smaller ravagers moved in perfect synchronization. Her children, her army, her instrument of vengeance for the death of their kin. She's the source, he said, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. Kill her and the pack coordination dies with her. Dante, no. Nyx grabbed his arm, her touch desperate. She's unstoppable. The old texts speak of her. She survived. Orbital bombardments laughed off plasma cannons. Even if you were 10 times stronger, then I guess I'll have to be more creative. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her thorax flutter with both terror and admiration. Nyx, I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it back. She silenced him by pressing her forehead against his, a gesture of ultimate intimacy in her culture. You're coming back to me. That's not a request, Dante Cross, that's an order. Despite everything, he smiled. Yes, ma'am. The mother beast's roar shook the ground as she began her ascent from the gorge, her massive claws carving handholds in solid rock. Behind her, the Ravager pack spread out in attack formation. Dante kissed Nyx's forehead gently, then stepped forward to meet his destiny. What followed was less a battle than a redefinition of what was possible. Dante moved like liquid lightning, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dance between claws that could crush hover tanks. But the smaller Ravagers weren't his target. They were obstacles to be bypassed, distractions to be eliminated with clinical efficiency. The mother beast swatted at him with car-sized claws, But Dante rolled beneath the strike and began to climb. His enhanced strength found purchase on her armored hide, and he ascended her massive form like scaling a living mountain. Nyx watched in breathless terror and awe as Dante fought his way up the creature's spine, dodging bone spurs the size of starship masts. The mother beast twisted and roared, trying to dislodge him, but his grip was unbreakable. "Impossible," she whispered, then louder, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "Impossible!" But Dante wasn't finished. With strength born of engineering and desperation, he drove his plasma-charged weapon deep into the creature's brainstem. The mother beast's roar became a scream of agony as electricity coursed through her massive nervous system. Still, she didn't fall. Instead, she reared up on her hind legs, trying to crush him against the rocky walls of the gorge. Dante held on, wrapping his arms around one of her massive bone spurs, and then did something that defied every law of biology Nyx understood. He began to tear. Using leverage and enhanced strength that shouldn't have been possible, Dante ripped the bone spur from the mother beast's spine. The creature's scream could be heard across 3 continents as her own weapon became her destruction. Dante drove the massive spike deep into her skull, piercing the armored brain case that had protected her for countless millennia. The mother beast swayed for a moment that seemed to last forever, her ancient eyes meeting Dante's in what might have been recognition. Then she toppled, her massive form striking the gorge floor with the impact of a falling starship. Silence fell across the battlefield. The remaining Ravagers, their coordination severed with their matriarch's death, scattered to the winds with confused whimpers. Dante stood atop the fallen Titan, bloodied but victorious, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. When he looked up and found Nyx's eyes across the battlefield, his smile was radiant with triumph and love. "You magnificent, impossible man," Nyx whispered, her bioluminescence cycling through every color in her emotional spectrum. "What are you?" As he made his way down from the mother beast's corpse, Dante's answer carried across the gorge with quiet confidence. "I'm whatever I need to be to keep you safe." In that moment, watching her engineered warrior claim victory over the impossible, Nyx realized that she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a living weapon who had chosen to become something far more precious. A protector, a partner, a man who fought not because he was programmed to, but because he had found something worth fighting for. 6 rotations after the mother beast's fall, the Valyrian High Council convened an emergency session. The crystalline chambers that had echoed with proud declarations of species superiority now hummed with uncomfortable silence. High Speaker Vexhai, his ornate carapace dulled with the weight of undeniable truth, stood before the assembled council members. "The human, Dante Cross," he began, his voice lacking its usual imperious tone, "has single-handedly eliminated the Ravager threat that has plagued our world for generations. Our military analysts estimate the creature he destroyed could have devastated 3 of our major city complexes." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, some of grudging respect, others of continued suspicion, but none could deny what their own sensors had recorded. Outside the council chambers, Nyx waited with Dante in the gardens of the governmental complex. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with nervous energy as she watched him tend to a cluster of wounded crystal flowers, delicate organisms that most beings couldn't even touch without destroying. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, referring to his decision to face the council. "We could leave. Find somewhere that doesn't see you as a threat to be managed." Dante looked up from the flowers, his gentle handling of the fragile organisms a stark contrast to the devastating power she'd witnessed at the gorge. "And let your people continue to live in fear of the next apex predator. Let them think all enhanced humans are monsters waiting to happen." He shook his head. "I've been running from what I am my whole life, Nyx. Maybe it's time to show them what I choose to be." The council's summons came an hour later. As they walked through corridors lined with Valyrian nobles, some staring with awe, others with barely concealed hostility, Nyx felt the weight of history pressing down on them. This moment would define not just their future, but the relationship between their species for generations to come. High Speaker Vexhai addressed Dante directly, his tone carefully neutral. Human, your actions have altered our understanding of your species' capabilities. The High Council acknowledges the debt Valeria Prime owes you. I don't want gratitude, Dante replied simply. I want understanding. Not all enhanced humans are weapons-seeking targets. Some of us are just people trying to find a place in the galaxy. Counselor Thyrix, her ancient carapace bearing the scars of countless battles, leaned forward. Yet you are demonstrably dangerous. How do we reconcile protection with the threat you represent? It was Nyx who answered, stepping forward with a confidence that surprised even herself. The same way we reconcile any relationship, with trust, understanding, and the recognition that we're stronger together than apart. Her markings brightened as she looked at Dante. This man didn't have to save our world. He could have hidden until rescue came. Instead, he chose to stand between us and annihilation. Because someone I care about was in danger, Dante added, quietly. Because I've learned that being engineered for war doesn't mean I have to live for it. The council deliberated for hours while Dante and Nyx waited in the gardens. As Valeria Prime's twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Nyx found herself studying Dante's profile in the dying light. Do you regret it? She asked. Everything that led you here? Dante considered the question seriously. The labs, the conditioning, the things I was forced to do, yes, I regret those. But the path that brought me to you? He turned to face her, his expression soft with emotion. Never. She moved closer, close enough that her bioluminescence cast rainbow patterns across his skin. The council will probably want to study you, monitor you, maybe even try to replicate your enhancements. Let them try, Dante said with quiet confidence. They can analyze my genetics, map my neural pathways, document every enhancement Cain built into me. But they'll never understand the most important modification I've made. Which is? Learning to love someone more than I fear what I am. The council's decision when it came was unprecedented in Valerian history. Dante would be granted citizenship and the freedom to remain on Valeria Prime, with Nyx serving as his cultural liaison and advocate. More importantly, he would help establish protocols for future contact with enhanced humans, not as threats to be eliminated, but as individuals to be evaluated on their choices rather than their origins. 3 months later, Nyx stood on the observation deck of the newly established interspecies research station, watching Dante work with a group of young Valerian scientists. His patience with their questions, his gentle correction of their assumptions, and his willingness to be vulnerable about his past had slowly won over even his harshest critics. You've changed us, she said that evening, as they watched the stars emerge over their new shared home. We changed each other, Dante corrected, pulling her close. I was a weapon pretending to be a man. You taught me I could be a man who happened to be capable of violence when necessary. Nyx's markings pulsed with the deep gold of contentment. And what happens now? Dante looked up at the stars, no longer seeing them as paths of escape, but as destinations yet to explore. Now we build something new, together. In the distance, a transport ship broke through the atmosphere, carrying the first delegation of human diplomats to visit Valeria Prime. Among them were other enhanced individuals, refugees like Dante who had spent their lives hiding what they were. But they wouldn't have to hide anymore. Love had built a bridge between worlds, and understanding had paved the way for a future where being different didn't mean being alone. As Valeria Prime's triple moons rose over the horizon, casting their silver light across a world forever changed, Dante Cross, weapon, survivor, protector, and finally, simply a man in love, pulled his partner close and smiled at the infinite possibilities stretching out before them among the stars.